welcome to the latest episode of the Moviescramble podcast. Yes, it's alive! It's alive! And from that, you might have guessed that we are discussing all things Frankenstein, looking at Guillermo del Toro's gothic Technicolor reimagining of Mary Shelley's sci-fi novel. Joining me today is a man who Simi and I believe must have been created in a lab because there's no way it's possible to be that handsome in real life. It's John. John, how are you?
Yes, yep. I think I'm more regarded as a monster rather than a creature, but yes, yeah, thank you very much for that. Yes, and obviously the lab must have burned down after they created me because there's nobody else like me around, is there? But yeah, I'm good. It's been a couple of weeks, obviously, so I like the idea of it's alive, relating to both the film and the podcast. So yes,
nice I thought you would like that.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing?
Very well. To our dear listener, I do have a bit of a husk about me. I'm getting over a flu, but very excited to talk about this film because I think this could be a contender for our top 10 of the year discussions as well.
Yeah, with a husk like that, we're looking at sort of OnlyFans account as well. You know, there's a whole market
absolutely. That's coming soon. Yeah. So Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein opens in the Arctic, where a Danish naval crew led by Lars Mikkelsen stumbles upon a half-dead Victor Frankenstein, played by Oscar Isaac, who's being pursued by a towering, anguished creature, played by Jacob Elordi.
My maker told his tale, and I will tell you mine. I remember pieces, memories of different men. And I saw it, your name. Victor Frankenstein.
From this prologue, the film sort of breaks into three different acts. Victor's side of the story, the creature's side of the story, and their final confrontation. So I'm not going to rehash the story of Frankenstein. I think we're all pretty familiar with how that works out. But what were your expectations going into this film, knowing that A, it is a sort of like classic monster movie with a rich history based in literature, but that it's also a Guillermo del Toro monster movie? Does that sort of like skew your expectations going into something like this?
It's kind of the sweet spot within a Venn diagram, isn't it? Because in Guillermo we trust, basically. Yeah. he doesn't make many mistakes. He tends not to have bad films or television. So there is a relatively high expectation for anything that he does. As far as I'm concerned, I know a lot of people are the same because they really rate him as being probably one of the best exponents of sort of the horror genre and adjacent to horror. Obviously, there's a number of films you could say perhaps are not quite horror films, but he is excellent at what he does and he's got a passion for what he does as well. So yeah, I was really looking forward to this. And obviously classic story, like I said, you don't need to rehash the basics of it again. Yeah, it's really is a bit of a sweet spot, and I was really intrigued to see what he was going to do with it. And yeah, I don't think I was terribly disappointed.
Yeah, I definitely had the same expectations. I expected something quite fairy tale like, as well as sort of classic horror. And we had obviously seen little snippets and previews from when they were filming in Edinburgh, and you got little glances at costume and set, which made me sort of just really excited about it. And he's someone, as you say, who has a passion for it. And interestingly, in one of his interviews, obviously his last film prior to this was Pinocchio. And that's about a sort of like father and creation as well. And he said that he saw these films as like two sides of the same coin as well, which I thought was a really interesting sort of notion to take into this, because I think everyone does think of Frankenstein as a straightforward sort of like monster movie, whereas he obviously wanted to create a sort of different vibe to this, which I think he succeeds in. So let's dive straight into performance. We have Jacob Elordi, who was cast at the last minute as the creature, because this role was due to be played by Andrew Garfield, but he had to drop out due to a scheduling conflict. How do you think he tackled this role, and does he elevate the character from a sort of like classic monster to something a little bit more tragic? I imagine his prep must have been quite rushed. Do you think he still gives quite a good performance in the film?
I thought he gave a fantastic performance in this film. It doesn't show that it was rushed in any way, and he obviously had a very clear idea of how he wanted to actually put the character of the creature across. It's very telling that he is called the creature, and the title cards during like the chapters, it's like the creature's tale. It's not the monster. He's not a monster. He's a creation. He's something that's been created. He obviously wanted to do something slightly different with the role, and the background that he's obviously been given to that, which obviously was an awful lot of work done in development of the character before he actually arrived. So I'd imagine he was kind of told, like, this is what we're kind of going for. Can you work with this? Can you fit into this? And he has basically humanized a character that was regarded as being a monster before. It wasn't regarded as being anything close to being a human character. And the depth that's actually involved in the time that's taken during the film to obviously allow Elordi to develop this character as a human, and like basically he's a blank slate as well, which I really liked. I really liked that fact, because it meant that there was no great expectations on what he was going to become as he developed as a creature, as he grew, as he understood what was going on around him. So yeah, I thought it was fantastic. It was really, really good.
I would agree with you. I feel like there is a real sadness to the creature that permeates the film. And don't get me wrong, we can still see his facial expression. He's not completely buried within like prosthesis, but it's his eyes that you're really focusing on, because they feel like the most human element of that character. And he conveys so much emotion through his eyes. I mean, when we first meet him, he's sort of like a wounded animal. You know, he's very distrustful, he's very vulnerable, you know, he's shackled and he's sort of abused by Victor Frankenstein. And it's such a powerful performance, because it makes you feel so angry at the injustice of his treatment and so sympathetic towards him. And I don't know a great deal of Jacob Elordi's work. I know he's sort of become famous through the likes of Euphoria, the television series, and obviously he played Elvis in the Priscilla film, but I don't actually know a lot of his work, and I thought he was phenomenal in this, especially because, you know, there's quite a few heavyweights that he's up against, or actors that are just really popular. And for someone who essentially could be dismissed as a sort of matinee idol, let's be honest, he's like 20 feet tall, he's, you know, chiseled, you know, all that sort of thing, but he's giving real depth here. And one of the things that I love about the Boris Karloff original interpretation of Frankenstein is how sad and lonely that character is, and I feel like Elordi really brings that to this character as well. You can feel his loneliness at times, which I think is no mean feat to actually have delivered a performance like that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about the eyes, because the first time you actually see him, all you see is his eyes. You see his bulk, but the first part of his actual face that you see is his eyes, because it's all covered up, because it's in the furthermost north, isn't it? Something like that.
Yes.
And yeah, so you see his eyes, and you see this rage in his eyes, which you would expect because of our understanding of the Frankenstein character. But then that changes very quickly. And that, again, very clever. And there's the whole thing about the eyes being the gateway to the soul. Now, does the creature have a soul? Because he's a composite of different people. So it opens up all that sort of idea as well. And there's a scene where there's photographs been taken of all the sort of composite bits, and it's one eye. That's the one thing you see. You see a single eye and all that as well. So yes, it all kind of fits in with what you're saying. So yeah.
Yeah, it's and that's the thing. I feel like this is a film of many, many layers as well, and it's a film that will probably benefit from rewatch, because you're taking in so much as you're going along. And then in sort of contrast that, we have Oscar Isaac's portrayal of Victor Frankenstein, where he is charming, cruel, and mad all at once. What do you think he brought to this? There's a more than a hint of swagger going on with this character, I think.
Yeah, it reminded me of the whole, like when you see these dramas and it's like Lord Byron and people like that. It's that kind of like you say, a certain amount of swagger about him, and it goes from him being this basically this mummy's boy into being the man that he became, and you can almost tell that by his hair, because his hair's quite nice and kept at the start, and then when there's the tragedy and he focuses on what he wants to do, he becomes more wild and dishevelled and everything like that. So yeah, there's a certain amount of that, and that all plays into the large, ironically larger than life sort of character. He's, he's holding court with all the physicians when he's showing off his experiments, and you only find out that it's actually a hearing rather than a demonstration. So it's so all this sort of stuff. So so he's obviously a maverick. He is somebody who doesn't care for societal norms. He doesn't want life to get in the way of what he's doing, which there's there's layers to that as well with the way that the story plays out. So yes, I thought he was immense in this, and he was very sort of focused, and sort of like his performance was very focused as well. There was only a certain amount of flamboyance about him because that wasn't necessary, because he was a very driven individual. So it was all about the work. Everything was to do with how he was going to get there. He didn't care for patrons. He didn't care for opinions of other people. It was just they were supposed to just accept what he was about and what he was doing. So it didn't matter. And yeah, I thought he kind of nailed it. And it's like the arrogance of a creator as well. That came across really, really well. Even when he'd just about been killed by the creature on the ice, he was still arrogant when he woke up and everything. There was that, let me tell you my story. It was all this sort of stuff. And rather than, there was an opportunity there for him just to say, there's a big fuck off monster out there who's trying to kill me. But no, but instead of saying that, he says, let me tell you about my past. Let me tell you. And so it's like, and they must have been sitting there going, tell us about the fucking monster, because it's coming.
Is this coming on the ship?
Yeah.
It definitely reminded me of the line of Colin Clive's character in the original 1931 Frankenstein, where when he obviously brings the creature to life and he says, now I know what it feels like to be God. And there's definitely that element in his character. Like, we see from his upbringing that he is desperate to prove to his father that he is worthy. He's not the beloved son like his younger brother is. He's desperate for this approval, and that travels with him obviously into adulthood, where as much as he doesn't court patrons or anything like that, but he is desperate to be accepted as this genius within society. His intellect and how that's perceived is really, really important to him, and there is a sort of rakishness to the way he maybe dresses and, as I say, swaggers about compared to more conservative society. But I thought he brought a really interesting dynamic to that role, because it's not like your stereotypical mad scientist. There was a real, and Guillermo del Toro has spoken about this, there's a real sort of father-son dynamic between Frankenstein and the creature. And he, in his recollections, was sort of not abused as a child necessarily, but not loved either. And we see that transport into his relationship with the creature. Did you get that sort of dynamic the whole way through, that he was just basically haunted by what he saw play out with his mum and dad, essentially?
Yeah, he was obviously a very clever and capable child, and his father knew that. But I think it's a generation upon generation thing. I kind of suspect that the father was treated in the same way as he was. So therefore he treated him in a way that in order to progress and learn, he needed punishment, he needed pain, because pain is a great reminder of being alive and a reminder of a lesson learned. So he would hit him, but they stopped hitting him in the hands because he needed his hands in order to work. So the face is vanity, so he hit him in the face, which I thought was very telling, because Victor Frankenstein did exactly the same thing with the creature when he was trying to teach him he would hit him, he would shackle him, he would shout at him, he would berate him, he would try and belittle him for something that's much bigger than him. He exerted this control over him by force of will more than anything else. And he was just using the same lessons that was taught to him. So it was just passed down and passed down. He didn't know any better because of that. Yeah. That's what he understood, to actually make a person, make somebody in his own image, if you like, by using the same sort of techniques. And yes, it was very telling. It was like father to son kind of idea. And the fact they didn't know what to do because he didn't know, it was not something he thought about. So he reverted to what he understood about parenting techniques, which was obviously not particularly nice.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about support. I mean, the supporting performances is an entirely stacked cast. You've got like Mia Goth, Christoph Waltz, Felix Kammerer, and Charles Dance. Like each of them brought so much to this film. Like there wasn't a small part, if you want to, put it that way. What did you think about all of their sort of performances and contributions to this particular version of Frankenstein?
Yeah, well, the smallest part was William, the brother, but he was a necessary foil because that was someone who drove Victor on to do what he was doing, because he saw what his father was like with his brother. It was a more loving relationship. They chatted, they laughed. You never heard his father laugh at any time with Victor. It was always very serious, very studious, very cold, if you like, which is quite apt in a place where the house that they lived looked freezing.
Yes.
It was massive, so there was all everything to do with the atmosphere. So that was a wee bit of a thankless role. But obviously, that actor, Felix, he is brilliant anyway, because obviously we've seen him before as well. Yeah. He was in All Quiet on the Western Front, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. He was fantastic in that. Yeah, he was the lead.
Yes. So, I was surprised that he would take on a role as small as that, but it was a pivotal role because it introduced the character of Elizabeth as well into it. And it showed that even though the brothers had been separated and there was a difference between the two, they obviously got on very well. They relied on each other to a certain extent. And there was a love there between them as well. They were pleased to see each other. It wasn't like a duty for him to actually call in. Obviously, he was calling in because he wanted to introduce his new bride and everything. And that opens up the part of Elizabeth, who was pivotal to the whole thing, because she was almost like the conscience that he never had, that Victor didn't have and struggled to get to. So he was captivated by her because it was something that he never expected. He found somebody who could almost have been his soulmate, but also there was obvious difficulties in there in the fact that she was going to marry his brother. And there was a certain attraction between the two of them because of science and because she was a modern woman for those times. She was interested in science. She was interested in nature. She had opinions. She didn't care who knew it, because there was the dinner table scene where they're all sitting around having dinner. And usually it's the women all stay at the table and the men go away and have cigars, but the other two men went away to have cigars and left Victor and Elizabeth to talk, because they'd heard her arguments before and they just couldn't be bothered listening to it again.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really good. And yes, obviously, the Christoph Waltz performance, he is just magnificent, let's face it. He
so
does
magnetic.
Sly so well. Yeah.
Like there's even like little touches where, like, when he was leading Victor Frankenstein like through a doorway, and the camera just panned down to his heels, and you just saw him do like a little hop over the doorway, and it was like he'd got his man and he was sort of jubilant. And like there's just all these little character touches that he does that you're like, you really are good at being a bastard. Like there's just there's no one doing it quite on the scale that he is. But I thought, like, for everyone in this film, because like I said, for a supporting cast, in inverted commas, the names are huge, and I don't feel like anyone is chewing the scenery or trying to over embellish their part, that everyone's sort of working together in this like really harmonious way. And the likes of Felix Kammerer, it's probably an opportunity to work with Guillermo del Toro that's the draw, no matter how many lines you might have or whatever. But I just thought it was so fascinating how they all worked together. And Mia Goth, I thought, was excellent in it as well, because she is the one that shows the creature empathy and, you know, offers her touch as well, like isn't afraid to get close to him, which obviously ties back into Frankenstein's memories of his mother as well. So there's this sort of notion of like generational trauma that's sort of going on throughout the film, which of course made me laugh, because Guillermo del Toro was like, well, yeah, I'm a Mexican Catholic. Generational trauma is like what we do, sort of thing. So, but fabulous that he's sort of woven it into this film in this way. One thing that also really stood out for me as well, and I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher his name, is Alexander Desplat's score. Like, it felt very like sentimental and sort of melodramatic, the kind of thing you would expect from a sort of lush kind of Mexican soap opera type of thing. It's very over the top at times. There's a load of strings. What did you think of that? Like, and how did that add to your viewing experience? Because I feel like in the cinema, you're totally swept up in this.
It was interesting to watch. There was a couple of montage sequences, and they used music in a specific way. It countered what you were actually seeing on the screen. You were seeing Victor like gathering up bits of bodies and dragging them and shoving away. And there was a waltz playing, this sort of gothic waltz, and it was just beautiful. The music kind of stood out in that way because it was counteracting what you were seeing. And it was very clever, because you could have had just this sort of very dramatic soundscape, but they were at pains to point out, no, the music's going to be slightly different here. It's going to fit in with, like you say, it's this sort of gothic, it's almost like a gothic romance and a melodrama involved. It wasn't sort of your standard horror film. Yes, it did go there and it came back and forward, but there was an awful lot of melody, and you don't normally see something in a waltz time. It's quite unusual unless it is something quite upbeat, not the work that goes into create a creature, you know, which is quite a horror thing. So in order to do that in the way that they did that, it was great. And then obviously when you had your big sequences in the tower and everything, like in the third act, the music was just right there, right in your face all the time, and it was great. It was really good. It's very, very clever, very subtle in the way that it did it, because it changes your perspective of what you're watching.
Absolutely, and you can't help but feel that that's got Del Toro's fingerprints all over it. Now, obviously, Desplat's a very, you know, he's an Oscar-winning composer. He's done loads of fantastic work, but you can't help but feel that Del Toro has somehow influenced that in some way through, you know, his idea of, well, as you said, like, let's play with him a little bit. Let's have a slop of bodies all over the floor, but let's have something sort of like gentle, like, you know, let's step inside Victor's mindset almost and sort of work with that as inspiration. So I thought that was fantastic. And more than that as well, we have Del Toro's insistence, quite rightly so, on practical sets and not AI. So Victor's lab is an abandoned Scottish water tower, because they were obviously filming here for quite a while. How do you think that adds to the viewing experience of this film? Because like I said, I feel like I'm going to have to go back and rewatch it, just because there was so much to take in on the screen that I'm worried that I've somehow missed something important.
Well, I don't think it's a case of missing something important. It's more a case of anticipation of additional material that you may not have taken in for whatever reason, because obviously you watched this film with your sort of critic's hat on more than anything else, because you produced the review for the website, which is absolutely fantastic as well. I reread it again last night. It's absolutely brilliant. It's one of the best reviews I've read of the film. Definitely. Thank you very much. No, seriously, no. And I'm not just saying that because, you know, I want you to keep doing this.
Flattery will get you everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. But yes, it's the tactile nature of a set. It means that it's so much easier for them to interact with things. You can feel the griminess of it. You can feel the moisture in the air because it's always raining and everything, and it just works really well because of that. And there's no need for there is obviously additional CG work done in there, but it's all kind of background stuff. It's not the stuff that they're interacting with. But obviously the Jacob Elordi character, I think there's a certain amount of CG in that, because he's not 7.5 feet tall, whereas obviously I know Oscar Isaac's a wee guy, he's a wee guy and everything, but I really like that, and the fact that it evoked like dirtiness and griminess and kind of the way that they were grasping for solutions and they didn't really know what they were doing, and it evoked the sort of the early sort of horror films as well, and that's the mad scientist lab. They have the big generator. Obviously, when he was doing the demonstration, it was these wee small generators, which was never explained what was actually in that. How did that create power? So, but they created a giant one of that as well. So, and it's almost the same idea as like having the electricity sparking off and all this kind of thing as well. So yes, it was kind of a homage to the original types of films, but also made it very sort of relevant for the period it was trying to set. I really liked it, and it does. You don't really think about it when you see good CG, but when you see something that uses practical effects more, it's so much better. It really is.
It's exactly what you said, like the moisture thing in particular, because I kept thinking how slippy the stonework would be in a place like that. It is a water tower. And then having watched the 1931 Frankenstein as well, with that kind of the staircase, and that is so uneven, it's practically on a tilt and it's very slippy because you can see the characters are really careful about going up and down it. So it made me think of that as well, but also just when you have a practical set like that, it changes the way an actor moves and interacts with his surroundings, because he's not speaking to a tennis ball, he's actively at a big desk and he's fumbling through papers. And even just to come back to that scene that you mentioned with the slop of the bodies all over the floor, all I could think of was that's not like that stonework's going to be covered and like there's no amount of mopping is going to get that like sort of away. Like it's so fascinating to watch how he builds his world out, and I feel like that really helps blend it, I guess, the aesthetic from that sort of classic horror, which, as you say, sort of harks back right to your original horror movies, but this sort of like fantasy horror hybrid that Guillermo del Toro really, so he's placing his own touch definitely on, like, even just right down to the set design. It feels very much like, you know, his handprints are all over it. And then, of course, and I mentioned this in the review, you've got the sort of like recurring motifs of the circles as well, which comes back to this notion of like generational trauma, life, death cycle, all that sort of thing. And when they were casting light in and out of the actual lab itself, it felt like almost like an expressionist film, because although it was in colour and the colour is very rich in this film, the shadow and light work I thought was phenomenal as well.
Yes, they use it almost in a sort of film noir kind of way, don't they, with the shadows and like light streaming through certain windows, and windows are broken, which obviously alters the light, but at the same time it makes everything kind of greyish and dark, and you have this contrast in colours with basically what Mia Goth is wearing and what Victor's mother was wearing, that kind of thing, that the brightness of their clothing, which makes them stand out, and I think it makes them stand out as people, as well as sort of people who are very fashionable. It almost highlights them, saying this is a different type of person, this is somebody out of the norm, this is somebody you should take notice of, and it's a sort of visual way of doing that. But yes, I really liked that. I thought that was excellent.
Well, I'm glad you brought up costume, because I was obsessed with it. I mean, Mia Goth is basically encompassed in sort of like sweeping tulle, or like there's even a little tribute to the Bride of Frankenstein in the way that her wedding dress is constructed as well. If you notice, the sleeves kind of look like bandages and things like that. The costume was fantastic in this, but it still felt, as you say, like of the period. And even though Victor's wardrobe, which apparently is inspired by David Bowie, it still felt very sort of resonant with his character and what somebody like him would have worn at the time. But I think it's also really telling, as you said, like towards their psychological state as well, because Victor becomes more and more dishevelled throughout the film, and Elizabeth's costumes are very like what I would call like deep jewel colours as well, and it's that sort of grounding her in the earth. Like, are you cognizant of that as you're watching it? Because I thought they were absolutely stunning to look at as well.
Yeah, I think it sort of signposted the characters in their sort of state of mind as well, because the mother was totally in red. So And she was heavily pregnant at the time, so there's obviously a lot of trauma there, and that obviously indicated a lot to do with blood and medicine, and obviously the way that she died as well. It was a very bloody way that she died, giving birth and everything. So there was that, and from that, Victor almost always had something that was red. He would have a red scarf. He would wear red gloves when he was doing certain work and all that. So that was kind of followed through on that. But the Mia Goth character of Elizabeth was seen as, like you say, like a jewel. I hadn't really thought about that, because you're talking about ruby red and sort of emerald green. So it was very it was almost fairy tale like. I thought that the way she was like a Disney princess when she was dressed in the big dresses, and obviously the wedding dress. I didn't get the reference to the Bride of Frankenstein at all with the ruffles. I missed that. But it's a very stunning image, because obviously you've got the tight corset as well, and there's a layer above the corset. So when things happen and there's a certain amount of blood, you get the full effect of these costumes and how they actually work with the people as well. I just thought, it's just it's clever, and it adds layers, but you can take it at the face value of them just being very rich, very wealthy people at the time, but you can also take it a wee bit deeper. Now, the men's costumes were not quite as extravagant. They were more suits and everything, but they had the touches, like you mentioned with Christoph Waltz. When he was skipping, he actually had gold inlay in the bottom of his boots, which clacked when he was moving, when he came into the sort of the big lecture theatre. And the cane as well, with the ivory cane. I'm not quite sure what that actual handle was, and I know the cane served a dual purpose as well, and that there was something inside the cane that he needed, but that was focused on a couple of times, and I didn't quite get what that was. Did you?
No, I didn't pick up that. This is what I mean about having to go back and rewatch for these sort of layers. I didn't quite catch what was on the top of that. I also thought it was quite funny though that he had on like tartan, like we'd call them like tartan trews almost, like for and it was like he was trying to blend in to his surroundings as well. But as you see, he's got that little touch of the gold that kind of separates him from everyone else around him. But even he was dressed in like a lovely, like sort of teal coloured like velvet jacket the first time that you really kind of clap eyes on him as well. So you're looking at all these characters and thinking, oh, you're someone who likes to be noticed, because when they're walking down the streets, and of course it's muddy, smelly, wet Edinburgh of that time, and everyone's sort of grey and brown and black and a bit miserable looking, and of course they sort of, it's like plumage, you know, walking down the street, and all of a sudden the peacock opens its feathers, like they draw your eye immediately amongst their surroundings.
Oh, definitely, yes. It's a nice visual cue, isn't it?
Yeah. And what I think this film does really well is the perspective shift. So as you've quite rightly pointed out, we get Victor's story, because why wouldn't we? Because it's so important. But actually we get the creature's version of events in the sort of second part of this. How did you feel that sort of, does that deepen your emotional connection with the character? Do you think it really changed up the story? Because obviously I don't think we've ever seen an adaptation quite like this, that's willing to sort of put you in the creature's shoes for quite so long. It
took an element that was in the original film of the old blind man.
Yes.
And totally expanded that so that you got the development of the creature in his mind and his ability to talk, and why he was able to reason and do what he did in the very first part of the film, in the sort of prelude on the ice, how he became who he was. He wasn't just this creature, he was someone who had learned, who had understood, who had basically loved the old man because he spent so much time with him. He cared for him, he was able to converse with him, and the old man liked the fact that he had somebody he could talk to, someone he could basically instruct. It was almost like the father figure he never had. Well. So and it wasn't something that I was expecting at all. I was expecting more of a sort of standard creature feature. So if you get this element where the creature is explained where he's come from, what he's done, it adds so much to the film. It completely shifts your perspective of Victor. Yeah, Victor obviously is a bit of a dick, but you expect the creature to be like that as well. So by swerving away from that, it totally changes your opinion and your allegiances as well. And like I mentioned before, with the creature, he's got no memory when he awakens, which I thought was very good, because what we've seen so many times with these kind of adaptations is it's the mind of a criminal or it's the mind of a psychopath that's been put into the body. So therefore you've got an idea of what the creature, what the monster is going to be like. But this is a complete blank slate. You never see the creature as a human previously. He's just a collection of parts that has been found and sort of put together. You've got no history of that at all. So all you understand about the creature is what you're actually seeing as he is learning and developing and basically becoming more human. That's what it comes down to. He's actually more human than Victor by the end of the film.
Yeah, absolutely. And that notion of, like, as you say, when he's sitting with the blind guy and they're learning together, essentially the big sort of message or story that he focuses on is the concept of forgiveness.
Yes.
And the blind man obviously makes the assumption that he is a wounded soldier, which is quite interesting as well. And because he is a wounded person, you know, he's absolutely bereft at the rejection of his creator. And I thought that was just so brilliantly done without ever, and don't get me wrong, I obviously have a soft spot for the Universal horror monsters, but without going into the whole friend notion with the outstretched hands, which still gets me right in the feels. But I felt this did it in a sort of like a really grown up and a mature way, and talking about these sort of like high level concepts, as I say, of like forgiveness and war and all that sort of thing, but doing it in a way that allows the creature to evolve. And I think that that's one of the things that really stands out. There's this notion of identity and rejection that both the creature and Victor experience throughout this film. And I think for a lot of people, it's going to challenge maybe their understanding of this story and also how this film works, but also really resonate. I mean, we have all no doubt felt a bit rejected based on our personality, or we maybe don't quite fit into a particular group or friends or work. I think it really, as you say, it just brings it all down to this human level, doesn't it?
Yeah, oh, it definitely does. And it's not something that you expect from a horror film that has been done so many times before. In various guises, not just under the Frankenstein banner, under, you know, different, you know, anything to do with, you know, creating life, that kind of thing. That it all goes back basically to the Frankenstein story. So the fact that Del Toro and everyone around within the production is able to come up with something that's completely different, something, a new take on it, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that legacy obviously is a big part of this film, not just because it carries the legacy of the original sort of iconic image of who Frankenstein is. Fun fact, Boris Karloff's makeup and look of the flat top with the screws is patented until January 2026 by Universal. And then that image is, I'm sure they'll keep the patent, but I just thought that was quite an interesting little side note. But this notion of legacy, I think that Del Toro is aware of the legacy of the character and the story, but obviously puts his own pin on it. And then you have Victor, who's very much aware of his own legacy. And a bit like what we said when we were just talking nonsense at the start of this pod about this desire to cheat death in a way by creating something else. Like it's kind of prescient in the sense that Mary Shelley obviously wrote this book, you know, hundreds of years ago, but we're still dealing with, sorry guys, male egos and their desire to leave this legacy behind. Like, I feel like the modern parallels are quite obvious, whether Del Toro's done that on purpose or not.
I don't think there's anything by accident in this film at all. I think it's very much on purpose. It's the same old story though, isn't it? It's people striving for something and not really understanding the consequences of it. All that Victor wants to do is create life. He wants to prove that he can do that. He can cheat death in a way. And then when he does that, he doesn't have the first clue about what he's going to do. His initial reaction is to chain the creature because it's to give him time. You would think that if you created something, you would want to spend so much time with him to begin with, just understanding him. First thing he does is he takes him and he chains him up because he doesn't know what to do with him. Same idea as like, like in Jurassic Park, you never stop for a moment to think whether you should have
the dinosaurs.
Yeah, and that we see these parallels in modern life all the time. There are, whether it's political, whether it's science or technology,
AI,
do certain things. AI, yes. We can do certain things, but should we be doing that? What are the consequences of that? What's the fallout from it? There's a whole raft of things you can go back through, all sorts of history about that, touching on wars as well, like this film does. Obviously they were started for a goal, but the outcome of it was millions of people dead at a time for what? An ideal for a family argument, two cousins having an argument in Europe, that kind of idea. So it's all about not realizing what the consequences are at all. And that really is like sort of the depth of film. Because if you think about it, like with Victor and his father didn't think about the consequences of beating his son, what that would do to his psyche, or he only thought that he would do that because that's how he did it as well. So there's all sorts of layers in there that kind of deal with that sort of thing, and it's very clever. And like I say, nothing is by accident in this film, not a single thing.
That's true. And Mia Goth's character obviously makes that point a bit more that you have just made as well, that it's literally two strangers are having an argument, and the consequences are for the young boys back home. It's this notion of like fighting for a concept that has nothing to do with you, and that kind of the havoc that Victor Frankenstein unleashes is the consequences of which there are victims of that are nothing to do with the fact that he's unleashed this on the world as well. And it's, as you say, it's not being sort of accountable for your own behaviour, but it's so fascinating. And I think it's one of these things that makes this story so universally appealing, centuries after the original's been written or films have been made, is that it still has that appeal because we haven't learned a bloody thing, is the
totally answer. Yes. I thought it was interesting, the fact that it's all about the background to its war as well. Obviously they get the bodies from a battlefield, and it's one that they know it's going to be a big battle, so therefore they'll get lots of bodies for it. But it's war that actually underpins the whole film, because the money that Victor actually gets comes from arms manufacturing, all this sort of stuff. The bodies he gets from it actually come from battles and war and everything as well. And that mirrors again like sort of everything that's kind of come from the 20th century. Computers, partly obviously AI as well, intelligence gathering technologies have all been developed through the necessity of war as well. Atomic weapons, everything to do with that, everything, all the Oppenheimer stuff, all because of war. It was a way to actually push forward the boundaries. And obviously, as I said last time, concentrated orange juice as well, because that was meant to, give the troops vitamin C, which is, but there's loads of things. And obviously the space race came from wars and everything as well. So it's just the fact that we haven't really changed from the time that the book was written to now. And it's just the same things that underpin how we actually develop. It's just crazy. It really is.
And I think that's really played out in the character that Christoph Waltz plays, because he is the arms manufacturer. And without obviously going into spoiler territory, his personal greed, his desire for personal gain is part of his downfall as well, because he's not funding this for some sort of, because he really believes in Victor Frankenstein or for some sort of benevolent reason. He obviously has ulterior motives, and again is that selfishness, that ego, that desire for legacy and to cheat death. It's all wrapped up within these characters in a way that it's like it's really hard to sort of, if you'd set this in 2025, everything, you could have kept the dialogue, you could have kept everything, and it would have still been totally applicable, which is quite mad. You spoke about the scene about getting dead bodies off the battlefield. That was actually one of my favourite scenes in the film. I know that sounds a bit weird, but just this notion that they were like, and he was like, don't take those ones because they'll have defrosted slightly, and pick up no bullet wounds to all this. Like there was specific instructions about what he wanted, and as the camera sort of pans back from him focusing on these bodies in a heap, you see, oh my God, there's thousands of bodies in heaps dotted all across this battlefield, and it sort of emphasised the futility of everything that's going on around them. Did you have any particular scenes that sort of stood out to you as being your favourites?
I liked the demonstration scene at the start where Victor is demonstrating the use of electricity in animating a body. I thought that was done particularly well because it was very sort of a showman type of performance, and the way even though he was striving to be a god, he dismissed religion and gods at the same time. And then when he plugs the electrodes in for the first time, it's just amazing. And then he's doing like tricks with it, like throwing the ball and all that. And the way that all came together, he was obviously wandering around throwing the ball up in the air and everything as well. So it's very casual, and it was like a production. It was like a performance, and I really liked that. And that gave you an insight into the level of what you would see with regards to the creature and the formation of it and everything to do that, because it was gross, because all you had was a bit of a torso and a head and one arm. So it was really, really sort of nice scene setting, I thought. So I really enjoyed that bit. What about yourself?
I did also jump out my skin at that scene because it reminded me of we've obviously recently watched Seven with the corpse that takes the breath, and that very much was that as well. I love that scene, and as I say, I love the battlefield scene, but I also just like that moment that we get to see. It's at the start, but we see it again as they come closer towards the ship with the creature in pursuit of Victor, because there is a real darkness to his eyes. And it brings you back that whole quote of like, I have love within me, like you've never seen, but I also have rage. And it really hammered home this message that this was a creature that desperately wanted to love and to be loved. But because of that rejection, he was completely fueled by hate. And like you said, I think it gives you a real insight into where the character has got to by that point. So I thought, there's so many that I feel like, again, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I want to go back and watch it again just to appreciate the scale of it all, because I think it's just it's so layered, and it's just so fantastically realised. I've obviously seen this in the cinema, you've seen this in the cinema. The film is coming to Netflix, but I feel like I would encourage people to go and see it in the cinema because it feels like a proper experience kind of film. Would you agree with that?
Oh, definitely. It is a big screen experience, and it's been made for a big screen, because the kind of canvas that Del Toro works on is always cinema. You can watch them quite nicely, but his films, especially these sort of gothic ones, especially the horror ones, need to be seen on the biggest screen possible. Look at The Shape of Water. That was a cinema experience. Crimson Peak, which has a certain amount of DNA in common with this film, is a cinema experience because of the use of snow and blood and the sort of the costuming and everything all to do with that. So yes, I think if you get the chance, see it on the big screen. I doubt you'll be able to see it on the big screen after it comes out on Netflix. So I think they withdraw it so that they push people towards the streaming service. And I suppose they paid for it, but at least it got a cinema release rather than just a straight Netflix release, which is something as well, because it built up a lot of very good word of mouth for it.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And I would definitely recommend this film. I'm a sucker for a monster movie at the best of times, and if, as you say, it's the sweet spot in the Venn diagram between monster movie and Guillermo del Toro. I think this has real contender potential for top 10 of the year, as far as I'm concerned. What about yourself? Would you recommend it?
Oh yeah, I had a sort of initial think about my top 10, and I think most of them are going to be horror films this year.
Yeah,
more than anything else. It's bizarre, it really is. But yes, it's one of the best films I've seen this year. I loved it. As soon as I saw the opening scene on the ice, I thought, I'm really going to enjoy this film. This is going to be great. So yeah, just you get a real sense of what it's about just from the opening in terms of the costuming, the lighting, and the story, and you think, this is going to be good. And I was not disappointed. Yeah.
I will say though that it's quite not a massively long run time, but the couple behind us in the cinema gave up about an hour in. That was obviously too much for them. So, and I would say that definitely the more the film went on, certainly the screening I was in, the more restless the audience were getting. Because I think it's a good 2.5 hours, which is fine. I'll happily sit through that. But just as a heads up, if you are going to see it, it is quite a long film.
Yes, but I was surprised because I looked at my watch thinking I'd been watching for about 30 minutes and it was an hour and a quarter. I'd actually been watching it. Just kind of flew in because I was totally absorbed in the film. I wasn't distracted in any way. So for me, that's a sign of a very good film.
Absolutely.
Not thinking about other stuff. I'm just totally right in there in the zone, and that's how it should be. It shouldn't be like, definitely. You get a bit fed up, but yeah, everybody's different.
That's true. So that's Frankenstein. That's Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein, we should say. And that is available on Netflix. It will be sort of limited runs in cinemas, but we've obviously encouraged you to try and see it in the cinema as well, because it is it's very much a big screen experience. So we thought that we'd talk about some of our favourite remakes, because although this isn't a direct remake from like the James Whale film or the Kenneth Branagh film, it is obviously a retelling of a classic story. So we have our top 3, and I think these are going to be quite interesting because I didn't realise that some of yours were remakes, and I didn't even know that some of mine were remakes when I was looking up films that we could talk about as well. So why don't you kick things off with your first big screen remake?
My first remake is a film called Outland, a science fiction film from 1981. It is a remake of High Noon from 1951. So obviously the story of High Noon is the sheriff who fights against all the bad guys on his own because nobody else in the town is prepared to help him. Outland is pretty much on the nose. It's a very sort of similar story. The sheriff in this case is Sean Connery. And it's set.
No way!
Yep, it's set in space. It's set on, is it Io, the moon, one of the moons of Jupiter, and it's a mining facility. And he's the sheriff there, or marshal, we call him. And he is coming towards the end of his tour. He's rotating back, so he's going back to Earth with his family. But at the same time, there are a couple of mysterious deaths actually in the facility, and the facility managers are just want to brush it off as being accidents that just kind of happen. I think it's Peter Boyle. It's one of the main guys.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. So as he begins to investigate, he finds out there's all sorts of shenanigans going on with trying to hit production targets and lack of care for the people who's actually there. But as he digs deeper, he becomes a target. And what actually happens is he gets completely isolated from the community within the mining facility. No one will help him at all. And the people who own the mining facility actually send in a team of mercenaries in order to kill him. And this is where the parallels with High Noon come in, because he has to face all of them. And this is an excellent wee film. Sean Connery in science fiction is a bit of a rarity anyway.
Yeah.
But the fact it's a sort of a remake of a Western, and in a way, like a lot of science fiction films take the elements from Westerns anyway, because there's sort of clear lines between good and evil, and the sort of the renegades and the people who work from the outside of the system and all this kind of thing. Very sort of standard sort of Western things. But this works really well because it is a good science fiction film, and it looks a bit like the first Alien film, in that it's grungy and it's dirty. Wow. It's people on the ground. They work in these facilities. It's not going to be nice. It's not going to be all spick and span. The technology is kind of retro-futuristic. Obviously, for 1981, you've got like wee sort of CRT screens and all this kind of thing, and it's not as polished as you would see now. If they did it now, it would be more sort of high tech and everything. But it's an excellent wee film, and the fact is that they use shotguns and all that within the facility. They don't use like laser beams and things to actually shoot people. And Sean Connery's excellent in it as well.
What accent does he do?
An accent. He does the Sean Connery accent, believe it or not. Have you seen this film by any chance?
No, I haven't. It sounds really like, obviously I'm familiar with High Noon, but you've sold me on this one.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty decent film. It's one of the first ones I thought about when you said top 3 remakes, and I had to double check that it was a remake as well, because I wasn't sure myself.
Yeah.
What about yourself?
My first pick is a film that I have such fond memories. As I've said this before in this podcast, my grandpa had about 4 videos. This was one of them. And we used to watch it all the time. And he would absolutely wet himself laughing. So my first remake is Dirty Rotten Scoundrels from 1988. And this is a remake of a 1964 film called Bedtime Story. So the plot of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels is Michael Caine is Lawrence Jameson. He's a suave con artist who basically operates in the French Riviera by swindling wealthy women. He is sort of disrupted in one of his cons by Freddie Benson, played by Steve Martin, who is, as you can imagine, as an American hustler, a louder, cruder version of himself. And they basically come up with this bet: whoever can con this young heiress first gets to stay, and the loser has to go on and work his trade in another town. And basically, there's so many schemes and like nonsense and slapstick that goes on. It's one of my favorite films because I think that both of the actors in this involved, obviously Michael Caine and Steve Martin, are phenomenal, and it is genuinely so funny. The similarities between this and Bedtime Story is that both films obviously centre on 2 male con artists competing over a mark, and they're both set in the French Riviera with the sort of structure of the bet and the rivalry following basically exactly the same story. But the difference is that the 1988 version is definitely a lot more slapstick, definitely a lot more humour, and Steve Martin's character is way more sort of vulgar and chaotic than his 1964 counterpart, as you can imagine. And the twist at the end of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels is completely different to how Bedtime Story ends, which makes things a lot more interesting. I think, honestly, this is one of my favourite films. It's regarded as a sort of comedy classic. It kind of cement Steve Martin's status as a sort of really top of his game comedic actor. It's also a brilliant performance from Michael Caine as well, who is genuinely funny and enjoying himself in this as well. And I think the chemistry between the two of them is absolutely brilliant in this. The dinner party scene with Ruprecht, and the scene where Steve Martin's in the wheelchair pretending that he can't walk, so Michael Caine sort of canes his legs and he's got to pretend. And so good. But I genuinely didn't know this was a remake, and actually it's been remade itself into The Hustle with Anne Hathaway and Rebel Wilson, so the sort of legacy of that continues. But if you haven't seen Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, please seek it out. It is pure joy from start to finish. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, I always quote the "can I go to the toilet" line.
Yes.
And he goes, "Thank you."
It's so good, and honestly, it's one of these films where after you've watched it, you'll find yourself going around going, "It's Fanny Eubanks from Omaha," as if that's like a really she's like the little character performance that's really good. But as I say, I love this film, and if you want to see actors genuinely having fun with what they're doing, this is one to seek out.
Brilliant, really good choice. I really like Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. I didn't like the remake of it so much. It was okay, but it just didn't have the same personality about it, basically because it's difficult to beat Steve Martin and Michael Caine. It really is. They're phenomenal in it. Yeah. And the twist at the end is very good with the Australian accents. Probably
as good as your Northern Irish one.
yeah, probably. But yes, that was particularly good. I did really enjoy that. So my second choice is the 1940 film His Girl Friday, starring Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell and Ralph Bellamy. It is a remake of the 1931 film The Front Page, and it has been since remade after that again. I think there was a Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau version of this.
Yeah, I think so.
As well at some point, This is a film that centres around Walter Burns, who is a newspaper editor who is trying to win back his former wife. She's about to go off and be married to another person. It's the Ralph Bellamy character, who's this sort of drippy, wet guy. And he persuades Hildy, his wife, to cover one more story, which is the execution of a murderer in a prison. And when they are there in the prison, the murderer escapes, and there's dual stories of trying to find the murderer. They actually find him and then secreting him away so that they can get an exclusive story about him, and also Walter trying to get his ex-wife back at the same time. Obviously, it's Howard Hawks. It's a screwball comedy. The dialogue is a mile a minute. It's just non-stop, and they give as good as they get in this, and it just works so well in this. It's just such a good film. Cary Grant, obviously at the top of his game, around about 1940-41.
Mm-hmm.
He had been doing these kind of screwball comedies. He's worked with Howard Hawks a few times, and it's just brilliant. It just works so well, and it's a film that you could probably never tire of watching and rewatching again. So, yes.
Agreed. That is a great pick. That is one of those films that is truly joyous to watch. And as you say, the dialogue is so rapid. It's absolutely fantastic. I've watched that for the first time maybe about a decade ago and just immediately fell in love. It's a great film.
Nice. Good stuff. Your second pick?
So inspired by something that I watched during the week, my second pick is 1982's The Thing, which is a remake of The Thing from Another World from 1951, and also nicely in keeping with our monster movie theme. So obviously set in a remote research station, a group of scientists discover an alien life form, and basically paranoia spreads throughout the team as to who may or may not have been infected by this thing, because they never say what it is. They never use the word alien or whatever, so they just say it as The Thing. Both films are actually obviously about this alien threat in the very remote setting, and the alien is discovered in ice in both cases. But the 1982 version is much darker. It's way more violent, psychological sort of horror. There's a lot more body horror as well. And in this case, the alien the thing can shapeshift, which doesn't happen in the 1951 version. But what's interesting is that both films are sort of noted as sort of, the 1951 film is noted for being a kind of like Cold War era thriller, whereas obviously the late 80s one is a sort of post-Vietnam, post-Watergate kind of paranoia type of thriller as well. And there's obviously the amazing practical effects that are present in the later one as well. It's definitely a cult classic. We watch it every Halloween. I absolutely love it. There's definitely prequels, there's TV shows, there's video games, there's spin-offs. But if you're looking for like a really good solid remake, I think The Thing is absolutely fantastic. The practical effects are incredible. And if you've not seen it, the blood testing scene is one of the most intense pieces of cinema you will ever watch. It's fantastic from start to finish. I think it really holds up. And I did have the pleasure one year as part of the Glasgow Film Festival's event cinema. They took everyone to the snow at Bray Head where they have the ski slopes, and we watched The Thing sitting in the snow. So it's just a fantastic film to watch. And I honestly think the practical effects hold up. I think it's really, really well done.
Yeah, definitely. I saw this at a very young age, probably before when I really should have seen it. And it's just because it was on a bit of a John Carpenter kick, because obviously of the Halloween films, and I saw him Precinct 13 and stuff like that. So I did see this quite early on and loved it, and it still stands up. I can quite happily sit and watch it. I introduced my son to it as well, and he loves the film, although he wasn't a great horror fan at the time, but it's great. And with obviously the parallel with Frankenstein is the sort of practical nature of the film as well. The effects in it are absolutely immense. The sort of the dripping and the blood and all the sinew and everything, all this kind of stuff, as the transformations actually happen, they're just brilliant. Really, really good film. Great performances. And the whole sort of isolation thing, all been set in the one sort of area and all that as well. Yeah, works perfectly well. And obviously a nice wee parallel with the snowy background to it as well. So yes.
Exactly. Yeah, no, we thought about the snow, but yes, it's definitely it's I was going to say it's good Halloween fodder. You can watch The Thing at any time. It's just a great film.
Yep. My last choice is the 2012 film Dread, which is kind of a loose reimagining of the Sylvester Stallone film from the early 90s, Judge Dredd. It's not entirely the same story or anything, but it basically uses information in the same way that the Judge Dredd film uses from the comics. Now, whereas the 95 version was more of a star vehicle, it was Sylvester Stallone in the lead role, and there was a lot of production problems with it, and lots of things were changed, so it sort of veered wildly away from sort of the origins of the actual character from the late 70s, 2000 AD comics. The 2012 one is far more respectful of it. It doesn't try to tell a massive big story. It's a day in the life of Judge Dredd, basically. And it's set within a tower block within Megacity 1. Megacity 1 is like a big, massive metropolis on the east coast of the United States. After, it's basically, there was a nuclear war and there's whole swathes of the country that are just irradiated, called Cursed Earth. And there's these big mega cities that have sprung up. There are 3 of them, 2 on the East Coast, 1 on the West Coast. And Judge Dredd is basically almost like a fascist policeman. They are judge, jury, and executioner. They do it all. They do everything. And they obviously very sort of militaristic uniforms and guns and motorcycles and things like that. So it's all very sort of right-wing fascist sort of stuff. But the city that he works in and patrols is completely fucked up because you've got, tens, if not hundreds of millions of people, and they're all completely screwed up in their own way. And this whole story is based on a tower block where a gangster is in there, played by Lena Headey, who is producing this new drug called slow-mo, which basically slows down time for the person who takes it, to the point where it's obviously it can be really dangerous because it can put them into like real problems. So he's basically having Judge Dredd and Judge Anderson, who is one of his, she's kind of a protege of Dredd. They have to work their way up this tower block, which is just completely run by all her people in order to try and get to the top. So it's almost like a game where you get towards the boss levels and all this kind of thing. But it works really well because it is faithful to the comics. The main character is played by Carl Urban, who had so little ego. Yeah, he had so little ego about it that he was quite happy to wear a helmet for the whole thing. The thing about Judge Dredd is you never see the top half of his face. You only see the bottom half of his face. And that was modelled on Clint Eastwood, the jawline, his big solid jawline and everything. Yeah. But you never see his face. But Sylvester Stallone insisted that you had to see his face during the film. So I know, completely, blows away the whole notion. That's sort of like the primary tenet of that character. You don't know who he is. He is a slightly unknown character. But Carl Urban, yeah, put the helmet on. I don't care. So I had it on all the time. And he gives this really good performance as Dredd as well, because Dredd is a man of few words. So it's all about the actions and everything. And he's so well trained. He knows what he's doing. He's been doing this for years and years. So this was a very good way of introducing the whole Megacity, Judge Dredd sort of universe in a small way. You didn't have to explain his background. You didn't have to explain the background to Megacity 1 and you just knew it was based in a tower block and they had to get to the top. That was it. And it works really well because of that. And Lena Headey gives a fantastic performance as the main baddie. She's all snarling and just really evil and everything. It's really, really good.
You wonder if the likes of The Raid was inspired by that then, the first one. Getting out of the tower block, but it's kind of similar.
Yeah, there was comparisons made at the time, but they were in production round about the same time. So it wasn't inspired one way or the other. I think it was one of these coincidences because obviously The Raid was quite a small budget film and it wasn't really done within the sort of Hollywood system. I don't think they had any sort of influence in each other, but it has been pointed out a number of times how similar they are in terms of the premise. But yes, it's a film that really works, really good. And it's just a shame that they couldn't do anything else afterwards. But yeah, it's the way of it.
Is there demand, do you think, for more Carl Urban?
They've been trying to do it, and he's said several times he would be quite happy to do it. He was involved in a 2017 attempt to get it done, and then the rights reverted back to the original owners, and they were going to do a TV show about it around about 2019, 2020, and Carl Urban was involved in that as well. And that get completely, they had scripts, they had money, and then that completely shut down during the pandemic, and it's just never started up again. But there has been talk, there's always chatter about them actually doing something, because it's ripe for sort of franchise because there's so many different elements to it. You could, like I mentioned, Judge Anderson, she had a whole sort of string of books, comic books, just dedicated to her and what she did, because she was from a different division. She was from the Psi division, which they used their sort of enhanced mental abilities to catch perps rather than just shootouts and things like that. So there was all, these kind of elements. They would, create a world, and you could quite easily do over a couple of TV series or something, or a series of films or whatever. Apparently it was originally mooted as they were going to do a trilogy. If the first one was successful, there was ideas for the second and third film, and it was Alex Garland that did the screenplay for the first film. So it was particularly good, and they wanted to keep it small as a good introduction, so that you didn't have to do any homework in order to see it.
That seems right for the picking, so maybe we might see.
You would think, there's so many of those out there though that that are a surprise, and yet we still get with things returning that we just can't understand why, like The Walking Dead, for instance, like we said.
Yes. So my last pick is 1959's Some Like It Hot, which is a remake of a French film from 1935 called Fanfare of Love, which I have never heard of before, and I'd only ever seen a poster. And basically, obviously, as you know, as most people know, Some Like It Hot centres around Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon, who witnessed the St. Valentine's Day massacre by mistake, and therefore had to disguise themselves as women and go on the road as part of a sort of travelling all-female band. And they obviously bump into Sugarcane, the singer, played by Marilyn Monroe, and they sort of end up in this sort of like screwball path of having to like avoid, those who they should be running into. Both films feature men disguising themselves as women to join a band, and the sort of comedic premise of gender disguise and romantic confusion is the sort of main crux of it. The difference is obviously Some Like It Hot added a gangster subplot to sort of raise the stakes a little bit, and with it being closer to the 60s than the 30s, the humour is maybe a wee bit more sharper and risque than the original French version. What I love about this film is, I could wax lyrical about this all day. I think the performances are fantastic. It's frequently ranked as one of the greatest comedies of all time. It has the iconic closing line of, nobody's perfect, and that little shrug, which I just think is absolute genius. And I think it's one of Marilyn Monroe's best performances as well. Like, she's sexy, she's sympathetic, she's warm, she's entertaining, she's really funny in it as well, which is, again, no mean feat against the likes of Jack Lemmon and Tony Curtis, who were sort of naturally just really good performers. So I think it's one of these really brilliant films. If you're going to go back and look at sort of classics and study them, this is definitely a good starting point as well. It's light, it's got a lightness of touch, it's really funny, as well as obviously having the sort of like more kind of serious subplots to it as well. So I think it was probably quite groundbreaking for its time. The 1935 film was probably even more groundbreaking because men dressing up as women seemed sort of really outrageous back then as well. But it's a film that's preserved in the National Film Registry for a reason. It's an absolute classic, and one that I didn't know was a remake, but worth seeking out just to revisit because it's just joy. I
had no idea. I just looked it up there. It was a remake, and there was a German remake of it in 1951 as well, apparently, according to Wikipedia.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But yes, I had no idea. I thought it was an original film, and it's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Because I thought Billy Wilder and I.A.L. Diamond had actually written the damn thing, but obviously didn't.
Me too. Yeah.
They done the screenplay and everything. But yes, it's up there as one of the best comedies ever. And I think that Tony Curtis as a woman, he's got the looks and he's got the legs as well. When you see him walking towards the train in the heels.
So unfair. Yeah, that really annoys me when you see his legs in this film. Like, how do you get better legs than I do? But they're absolutely gorgeous. And he obviously does his little sort of Cary Grant impression in this film as well.
Yeah.
And it's really good fun. But as I say, one that I didn't know was a remake. But it's interesting because I feel like in that era in particular, like Hitchcock remade his own films as well, and there was a lot of looking at early sort of 20s and 30s European cinema and sort of transposing the ideas into sort of like it tends to be sort of like screwball comedies or like spy thrillers as well. I feel like that was really common practice sort of in that late 50s, early 60s era, was actually to go back and look at what Europe had been doing in early cinema and sort of updating it slightly.
Yeah, the key thing is here that they were updating it and they were changing it. They were modernising it, and they were adding elements to it. Whereas now, when you get remakes of a film, maybe a French, German, Italian film, they just do a straight remake of it. Yeah. There's not as much imagination put into it. Because I was looking at some of the ones, like the Russell Crowe one, The Next 3 Days, which is a remake of a very, very good French film. And there was no imagination put into that at all. It was just very similar and everything. But yeah, I stayed away from the Hitchcock ones and things like that because we had talked about them at length. So I didn't want to kind of repeat myself. Because there's obviously, well, he was quite famous for remaking his own stuff anyway, wasn't he? So yeah, I wanted to stay away from some of those ones. Because ones I looked at, I thought, yeah, okay, no, we talked about it. No.
Well, I was also looking at sort of English language remakes of foreign films, but 9 times out of 10 I've been left disappointed with English language remake, as you've said, because they don't quite capture the cultural sort of finer points of the language that they've sort of translated from. I think even like I rewatched the Ring just before Halloween there for my Final Girls Club, and I remember at the time when I went to see it thinking it was quite good, but watching it back, you're like, oh, this is quite guff, actually. Like, it's very, very sort of like melodramatic, and it doesn't capture the sort of intense like notion of the original sort of Japanese drama. So as much as obviously this is a remake of a French film, I tried to not look at foreign language remakes because I often feel like you're left disappointed with them.
Yes, you can be, because if you enjoy the reason they get remade is because they were popular and they were good.
So, yeah. And it doesn't always quite translate into English. So that is it from the Moviescramble podcast. We are well and truly back. I'm sure you've all missed us. And you can catch us on all the usual social channels, which is including Blue Sky, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and the platform formerly known as Twitter. And if you've got any remakes that you want to share with us that you think do it better than the original, you can always let us know, as well as your thoughts on Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. But until next time, it is goodbye from me. Bye.
Bye.